Welcome to this special edition of Diabetes Day by Day, where we're going to focus on nutrition and the importance of a nutrient-rich diet for people with type 2 diabetes. I'm your host, Dr. Neil Skolnik, Professor of Family and Community Medicine at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University. This is a special edition, and it's sponsored by Fresh Avocados Love One Today. There is no doubt most of us have a lot to learn about nutrition, how to maximize our health by understanding nutrition better, and by doing so, be able to eat in a healthy manner. Our goal today is to provide information to help you, our listeners, do that. Let me first introduce my co-host.
I'm Dr. Sarah Wettergreen, an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist. We know a healthy diet is one of the foundations of a healthy life and an important part of the approach to diabetes health and wellness. So today we're going to discuss the question, is there a best diet for people with type 2 diabetes? We're also going to talk about the importance of a nutrient-dense eating pattern and talk through some practical pointers about how to actually implement this nutrient-dense eating pattern.
Yeah, and these are things that we'd think would be easy, right? We eat all day long, or at least a number of times during the day, and you would think how to eat well comes naturally. It doesn't. It takes a lot of knowledge. And so joining Sarah and I today are two experts in the field, Erin Palinski-Wade, who is a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist, who is the founder and owner of Vernon Nutrition Center, a nutrition counseling group focused on the areas of diabetes, weight management, cardiovascular disease, gut health, sports nutrition, and general wellness. Erin's motto is progress, not perfection. Boy, do I love that. And the other thing I noticed, Erin, on your website is you said we need to shift the focus from deprivation to nutrition and enjoyment. Erin, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
Also joining us is Elizabeth Hanna, who is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist. Liz is the director of nutrition at the American Diabetes Association, as well as an adjunct professor at Rutgers University. Welcome, Liz.
Hi, Neil. It's great to be here to discuss this really important topic. Thanks for having me.
Liz, let's start with the question that I often hear from my patients and also other clinicians, which is there a best diet for people with type 2 diabetes?
Thank you, Neil. It's really interesting that you mentioned that. I still remember a time when everyone with diabetes was prescribed the same cookie cutter restrictive diet. So I'm glad that we're shifting our focus from restriction and deprivation to all foods fitting. And at that time, there were personal and cultural preferences, access to healthy foods, health literacy needs that were just not considered. And the focus was on individual nutrients rather than the overall eating pattern. There's really been a movement to change our language about how we describe what we eat from diet to eating pattern. So you'll hear me referring to eating pattern a little more often throughout the podcast. And that's to fully capture the idea that it's the complex combination of various foods that have the potential to impact our health, and not just one food or one nutrient that's capable of doing that. And so essentially all of the nutrients in the various foods that we eat, they work synergistically and not in isolation to impact our health. So to answer your question, there is emerging evidence that suggests that there's no perfect diet for everyone with diabetes, and that meal planning approaches really need to be individualized. Evidence does support using the diabetes plate method and carbohydrate counting to lower hemoglobin A1C percent. And we know that in order for any diet to be effective in managing chronic disease, it really needs to be realistic and sustainable in the long run. The good news I have to share with you today is that people with diabetes have lots of options and lots of eating patterns that they can choose to follow. And that includes low carbohydrate, Mediterranean, and also vegetarian and vegan. So lots of options.
I love that, Liz. And I completely agree with all of your comments. I think it's such a win that there isn't a best diet. How boring would that be to have to eat the same foods exactly every day? I can only have this for breakfast, this for lunch, this is a snack. The variety, I think, just brings so much personalization and takes into account your individual preferences, maybe your access to certain foods, different seasons of the year that there are different foods available, what you have regionally available to you. I think all of that is just so important in having a rich life as someone living with diabetes. Now, to switch over to you, Erin, while we know there's no best diet, we know that nutrition remains important. There's maybe certain ways that might be more nutritious or more evidence based ways to eat. So, what advice do you have for our listeners about how to select healthy, nutritious foods to eat? And do you also have any tips for how to make this easy and manageable?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, Sarah, because I feel like, what Liz was saying too is we're not trying to focus so much on the nutrients and more of the eating pattern because that's what makes it maintainable. And we know that consistency is really the key to improving health and improving blood sugar management. So when I'm talking to my clients and I try to, get this idea of getting more nutrition on the plate, but making it manageable and not overwhelming, I really like to think about almost thinking about your plate in the form of building blocks. And there's three essential components we want to include on our plate to round it out, to make sure it's nutrient dense, to make sure there's variety, but also that it's balanced for blood sugar management. And so this would be including slow digested carbohydrates, proteins, and good fats. And so when you have this trio of nutrients, it can open up a ton of variety of choices that you can put on your plate, whether it's a meal or a snack. But at the same time, that trio of nutrients really promotes satiety after meals, so that feeling of fullness and helps with appetite regulation. And it also helps to keep blood glucose levels in a target range because it's promoting balanced blood sugar. So when you think about the idea of slow digested carbohydrates, this could be whole fruits because they have fiber. This could be vegetables. This could be foods like fresh avocado, broccolis, berries, but also things like beans and lentils, whole grain breads, quinoa, barley, oats. And the portion is, of course, going to be important. We don't want to have an entire plate full of carbohydrate containing foods because that can increase blood sugar after a meal. And so the right portion is going to really be dependent on that individual and their blood sugar goals and their nutrient needs. But that would be one component. Pairing that with a source of lean protein can also improve satiety and blood sugar balance. Now, this could be lean proteins from animal choices like chicken and seafood. It could be milk and yogurt, but also vegetarian and vegan choices like beans and nuts and seeds and tofu. And then if we think about those good fats that add nutrients and add satiety, this would be where we find foods like fresh avocado, nuts, seeds, oils, and dressing. And of course, all of these things, we're going to have balance. We're going to look at the portions and figuring out what's right for you as the individual. But having that balance and those core nutrients on your plate really gives you a lot of variety, but a great way to meet your nutrition needs at the end of the day.
So, question. One of the things that I hear from my patients, the two things they seem to be afraid of is actually carbs and fats for different reasons. Can you tell us a little more about how you put that in perspective? First, starting with carbs, are there any particular carbs that our patients should be careful about?
Yeah, Neil, that's such a great question. So when it comes to carbohydrates, they're not all created equal, and there's no reason to be fearful of carbohydrates. In fact, they can offer many benefits and many variety to our plate. But trying to focus on slow digested carbohydrates instead of refined carbohydrates or simple sugar is really key when we think about blood sugar balance, right? So slow digested carbohydrates, they're going to be foods that contain more fiber, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, beans and lentils. And they're going to have that fiber, which is going to slow down how quickly they're absorbed in the body. They're also going to be providing us with more of a feeling of fullness after eating. So it's easier for portion control there. And so when we're adding these to our plate, we want to think that slow digested carbohydrates don't just come from one food group. We can find them in a variety of foods. So they could be coming from non-starchy vegetables, and non-starchy vegetables are a great way to get some carbohydrate and a large amount of fiber with very few calories too. So if you're thinking about weight management, you're thinking about adding bulk to your meals, those non-starchy vegetables can really be a great option. Fruit is also great, and it's a great way to get slow digested carbohydrate, but it does contain a larger volume of carbohydrate. One thing I like to think about in this group, though, and it's a little confusing sometimes, is fresh avocado is actually a fruit. But unlike most fruits, it contains virtually no carbohydrate because there's 4 grams of carbohydrate in a serving of avocado, which is a third of a fresh avocado, but 3 grams of that are coming from fiber. So it's going to have limited impact on blood sugar. It's going to give a nice source of fullness from the fiber, but you're also getting those good fats too in the avocado along with water and the fiber. So it really is a nice balance. And then we can think about things like whole grains too. Whole grain bread, quinoa, oats, barley. Those are going to be better blood sugar choices than a white flour or a simple sugar like we might find in a candy or a dessert. So you can incorporate that variety, but with more balanced blood sugar.
It's interesting. It's so helpful to hear those details because often we hear the large ideas, and I know that for myself, for instance, you mentioned the non-starchy veggies. We don't eat just meals. I know I snack a lot, and I've changed my snacks over the last few years to include the non-starchy vegetables, which are often give that satisfaction of crunchiness and chewingness, as well as a nice taste once you get used to using them as your snack and are healthy in the ways that you described. Liz, can you talk a little bit about the area of fat? Again, that's the other place where I hear my patients worry because they somehow heard years ago, maybe recently, that fat is bad for them. Can you put that in perspective for
Yeah,
us?
absolutely. And Erin, I want to say you made some really great points about carbohydrates, and carbs and fat. I would say over the last 20 years, they unfortunately have been placed in a negative light in the media and in the public, and there's a lot of fear surrounding consuming them. I think what people with diabetes need to really focus on is the impact or the importance of portioning, right? So when we say all foods fit, we really mean that you can eat all different kinds of foods. You can eat carbs, you can eat fat, you can eat protein. The key is to really manage your portions. So that's why we always encourage using the diabetes plate method. So if you were to look at that, you would see that just a fourth of your plate you would fill with carbohydrate rich foods. So that's not a lot. So that we're talking about, if you're having spaghetti and meatballs, the spaghetti's going in that fourth of your plate. I always like to role play with clients and we talk about the different components of a meal and where, what the carbohydrates are and how much they would be portioned at a plate. So just, I would say focus on small portions when it comes to carbs and fat, but enjoy them. Do not deprive yourself.
I'm guessing, Erin, you would agree with that enjoying food piece.
Oh, 100%. I mean, honestly, if you don't enjoy it, why are you eating it, right? Because if you're going to be eating something you don't enjoy day after day, that's affecting your quality of life, but it's also just not realistic. You're not going to stick with that. And so we have to find ways to look at the foods you love and figure out a way to make them work and still match your blood sugar goals and your weight goals. And there's so many ways to do that. And, to Liz's point, what she was saying, and I love the plate method because it really does allow a little bit of everything and showing you how you can make all of those foods fit. And you were talking a bit about that whole idea of people being fearful of fats, and this is, I think, an area I see so much with my clients is that they are so scared of foods that contain fat or that word fat, just because there was that whole fat-free diet trend, decades ago, that has really made people fearful. And so many of the foods that people love and that are satisfying do contain fat. So it's really focusing in on that. Fat is not bad, but not all dietary fat is the same. And if we're looking for more foods that contain the good fat, the unsaturated fat, and incorporating that into our plate in small portions, that's going to be able to give us more satiety and even just make meals feel more enjoyable. And it was funny because there was a study, and I like to share this study with my clients a lot, the ones that are really fearful of fat. And this study was based on avocado, and we know that avocado contains the good fats. So this study, they looked at nutrient-dense sources of unsaturated fat in the diet. It was a large study. It was called the Habitual Diet and Avocado Trial. And researchers at 4 clinical centers, they looked at the impact of eating 1 fresh avocado a day for 6 months on weight-related measures, on markers of cardiometabolic risk, and diet quality. And what this study found was that despite that there was additional calories and fat from the avocado, that regular avocado consumption did not lead to any changes in body weight. There was no change in fat in the liver or even belly fat. And that also making a habit of eating fresh avocado daily led to modest reductions in total and LDL cholesterol, which we know is the unhealthy cholesterol levels. It improved diet quality compared to the control group, which we know is important when it comes to diabetes management. And the study, it was supported by the Avocado Nutrition Center, and the findings from one study, they can't be generalized to larger populations. But to me and to all of us, it really shows that there's this growing body of evidence to suggest that avocados are heart healthy, they're associated with better diet quality. And I like to show this to my clients to say, look, here's a way you can see that fat was added to the diet, the good fat, but it didn't have a negative impact when we look at the factors that people are fearful of, especially when it comes to weight management. And that's why we don't want to villainize fat, but definitely adding it to the plate in small quantities, like a third of a fresh avocado, it's going to have potentially beneficial effects.
I just wanted to chime in and piggyback on what Erin said about including fats in your diet. I want to just bring up again that we mentioned low carb eating is one of those eating patterns that we know is really beneficial for blood glucose management, but also weight loss. And within the context of that diet, you are advised to consume more fat. More of those good fats, if possible, while keeping your carbohydrates low. So not only does it help you manage your blood glucose, but it does help keep you full, and that's really what works to help you, lose weight if you need to lose weight. So that's one situation where we might say you don't need to limit your fat, but again, it's in the context of eating a low carb eating pattern.
I think that's also important to know, and thinking about each of these nutritional components and how they come together to really fill out that well-rounded plate. And thinking about, we're not trying to necessarily restrict, we're all today talking about what can we add in, what nutrients can we bring to the plate, versus focusing on, you can't have this, you can't have this. It's all just thinking about how each of these elements come together. And Erin, I think you did a great job of clarifying. Many of our listeners might be thinking, what makes this fat good? What makes a certain fat good? So hearing the data from that study definitely gives us some more information to clarify what that means to be a good fat and what the nutritional benefits are that potentially come from that. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, the nutrient we haven't talked about much yet is protein. Liz, would you mind sharing some more information about how protein might fit into our plate?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Protein is one of the most crucial macronutrients that you can consume. And interestingly, the name comes from the Greek word proteos, meaning primary or first place. That's how important this nutrient is. It provides structure for all of our body's cells and tissues. It assists in many of the body's functions. For example, enzymes that assist with digestion and some hormones like insulin, which many of you are familiar with, which helps us use glucose for energy, are considered proteins. Additionally, it helps repair and build your body's tissues. It preserves muscle mass, especially during weight loss. It drives metabolic reactions, and there are proteins like albumin that help us maintain pH and fluid balance. And additionally, it helps it makes up antibodies, which a lot of you are now familiar with this term post-COVID. That's part of our immune response, so it helps us fight infection. In addition to all of these really important functions, consuming it at meals helps keep you full. And it doesn't have much of an impact on blood glucose, so it really does help aid in weight management efforts, which is important for people with diabetes to know if they need to lose weight. The amount you need really depends on many factors, including your activity level, age, muscle mass, and overall health. But generally speaking, you want to try to aim for about 20 to 30 grams at the meal of either lean animal-based proteins or plant-based proteins as well. So it's a very, very important nutrient, and I'm glad that you brought that up so that we could highlight, all of the important functions that it plays.
That is so important. And this is such a great overview of all the different components of diet. And Sarah, I love the way you put it in perspective. It's about what to add in, not always about what to take out. Let's take a break now for a word from our sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by Fresh Avocados. Love one today. When it comes to managing and reducing complications related to diabetes, nutrition is an important piece of the puzzle. But finding a healthy eating pattern that can both fit into your lifestyle and be enjoyable can be tough. You can eat deliciously and nutritiously with fresh avocados. Unlike most other fruits, avocados contain 0 grams of naturally occurring sugar per serving and do not affect the glycemic response. They're also the perfect addition to so many recipes. As a burger topper, mashed in a chicken salad, blended into a smoothie, baked into muffins, and more. Fresh Avocados, Love One Today, has free nutrition guides, simple and tasty recipes, and tips to support you. Visit loveonetoday.com to get inspired. And now, Sarah, back to our podcast.
Thanks so much, Neil. Erin, I want to come back to you and figure out how to put this all together. We've now thought about many different foods, how they break down in terms of macronutrients, how we can bring them together in the plate. But I will say the most common question that I get in working with people who are living with diabetes is, well, what should I eat? Just tell me exactly the meals I should eat. How do I put this together? And there's no one right way to do that. Can you talk a little bit about meal planning and preparation and how we actually put these elements together to make those meals? I know you're a mom with 3 kids. You've got a lot on your plate, emotional plate, as well as your eating plate, and things can get hectic at times. So how do we actually bring this information together to make a nutrient-dense eating pattern part of a routine?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think that is the biggest question when clients come into my office is, maybe they know what they potentially should be eating, but they have no idea how to put it together or how not to eat the same thing day after day without getting bored. So, that's where I really like to tell my clients, like, let's just take it down to basics. Let's not overwhelm ourselves. And just when you're sitting down for a meal or a snack, like, look at the plate first and just in your head, just visualize that you're dividing it into sections. And this doesn't have to be, figurative sections where you're only going to put your food in little spots on the plate. You can mix it all together. But before you decide on what you actually are going to put on your plate, you're thinking and kind of visualizing, all right, if I was going to take a half of this plate and fill it with those non-starchy vegetables to get in the nutrients, get in the fiber, what vegetables might I add to my plate? And in this same half of the plate, we could also add some lower carbohydrate fruit. Now, you wouldn't want the whole plate to half that plate to be the fruit, but something like fresh avocado could really fit the mold here because fresh avocado, we know, contains virtually no carbohydrate. It has no sugar like other fruits. So that could go along with those non-starchy vegetables. A third of a fresh avocado is 1 serving. So that, along with some other non-starchy vegetables, could fill up the plate. Then you want to visualize, okay, a quarter of the plate be lean protein, another quarter of the plate would be these whole grains. And so now that I have that in my head and I'm visualizing how my plate's going to be divided, what does that look like in a meal? So Liz mentioned before, pasta dish. A pasta, if we're thinking about a quarter of the plate being whole grain pasta, that isn't much. But if I take that pasta and I mix in diced tomatoes and fresh spinach and diced avocado and some chicken breast and mix it all together and maybe drizzle a little olive oil, now I have this colorful, robust plate that's incredibly filling, and I've checked all the boxes. I have all of those nutrients on that plate. And that's where, when we use this visualization method, it gives us so much opportunity for variety and to mix things up. And then what I tell my clients too is once they come up with a few ideas that they really love, that they know are incorporating all of these different groups and in the right balance, I like to recommend what I call the sticky note meal planning method, is that if you take a sticky note and you write down the meal that you enjoyed and you found worked well for blood sugar and appetite regulation, put it on a sticky note. You can put it on the calendar for the next time you want to eat it. And I do this with my family. We all pick a meal and we put it on the calendar. And week to week, when I'm thinking about meal planning and what I'm going to have as a meal, I just rotate the sticky notes from one week to the next. So now I know, the 4 or 5 maybe core meals that I really enjoy and want to have and have leftovers. but then we can rotate it and really have an easy way to meal plan so it takes that overwhelm away.
I know that feeling of stress when it's that evening time, it's getting close to time to have an evening meal, and you're like, what am I going to put together? So, having some go to ideas that worked well, that fit well into your routine, helped with satiety, helped with your glucose, all of those benefits. And if you can just go to that right away, I love that sticky note method. Now, in thinking about how to plan these meals, I'd like to go to you, Liz. What other suggestions do you have for meal planning or other resources or tips?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm happy to share a couple more meal planning tips. I think Erin brought up a lot of great points about the importance of pairing different foods together. So the combination of those fiber-containing carbs and the protein and the unsaturated fats, those all help to slow digestion and help with blood glucose management. The other things I want to add to that is really remembering that you can still enjoy cultural food staples. We've gotten a lot of clients that have said, "I didn't really grow up with, eating grilled chicken and some of the foods that they typically see on, in pictures that depict healthy food. You can still eat your cultural staple foods, the foods that you grew up eating, and portion them appropriately according to the diabetes plate method. You can still stick to a budget, and you can still use spices and seasonings to flavor your food. So you don't have to abandon the foods that you're comfortable with, that you grew up with. You don't have to eat bland food, and you don't have to spend tons of money. Now, of course, there's some planning involved with keeping to a budget, but it is definitely possible. And I want to take this time to let everyone know about the diabetesfoodhub.org. If you haven't gone on the page and checked it out, we have a plethora of recipes tailored to every need: budget friendly, low sodium, kidney friendly, and there's all different kinds of cuisines that you can also get recipes for: Southern soul food, Hispanic, Latino, Mediterranean, vegetarian, and low carb. There's also a really great meal planning feature and grocery list planner that you can use on there as well.
I love that the resources have started to be more inclusive of those different cultural patterns of eating as well. I think looking historically, many of the resources, like you said, were like a chicken breast with the vegetable, and it didn't really allow a lot of opportunity for people to think, well, that's not the type of food that I eat. Where do my foods fit in? And as a pharmacist who works with people living with diabetes, I often have to do some research to learn what these different foods are, and I make that my own responsibility to figure out how these foods all fit together. So as we get closer to the end of our time here, I want to bring some concrete examples in. So Erin, could you give us a few specific examples of different meals and snacks and how they might affect blood glucose?
I'd love to. I'd love to. And I absolutely love the resources Liz shared, as well as the idea of, taking these culturally appropriate foods and the food you grew up with and not giving them up and just maybe giving them a little bit of a makeover. So, that's one of the things I love to do with my clients. And I love that you do that for them too, Sarah, is just really helping people identify what they're already eating and what's a little switch they can make to make it more blood sugar friendly. One area, when we're thinking about like concrete examples. So for instance, I get so many clients that just love the idea of a sandwich, right? On all different sandwiches, but a sandwich. So if we're trying to say, okay, here's the typical sandwich that someone's eating and how do we make it more blood sugar friendly? We can look at a couple components. Maybe that sandwich is turkey and cheese on white bread. So the first swap would be to have more of a slow digested carbohydrate instead of the white bread, which is a refined carbohydrate, gets digested quicker. So you could do a whole grain bread, or one thing I love to recommend is a whole grain wrap, because you can actually fit a lot more inside a wrap and it gives more opportunity to incorporate more vegetables and whatnot. So let's say we switch that bread out for a whole grain wrap. We can include the turkey. Maybe you can include a bit of cheese, but a little bit less cheese, or swap out the cheese altogether. And one of my favorite substitutes is, instead of a slice of cheese, is a slice of fresh avocado. Then you could put some lettuce, tomato, peppers, whatever you like. And then as far as a bit of a dressing goes, you can use more good fat with a vinaigrette, an olive oil based vinaigrette. So now we're getting the protein, we're getting the good fat, we're getting the fiber. And it's going to have much less of an impact on blood sugar, but it still feels and looks very much like that traditional sandwich. Even the idea of breakfast in the morning. If you're somebody who loves eggs and toast in the morning, you can give that a bit of a makeover. So instead of just the eggs and the toast, you could scramble egg, but in the scrambled egg, add some vegetables. Once a week, I will dice up vegetables, saute them a little bit, and keep them in the fridge so I can pop them into eggs really easy in the morning. Even faster is you can take whisked egg, the diced vegetables, put them into a muffin tin and bake them. So you're basically making egg souffles and then you're just warming them up in the morning. I like to do diced avocado, some tomato, a little spinach in the egg, and then pair it with a bowl of fresh berries. So now I'm getting the slow digested carb, there's the protein, and the good fat is now in that egg dish. So similar, but a bit of a makeover to make it a little bit more blood sugar friendly. And the same thing with dinner. I feel like so many people think they have to give up pasta. And I mentioned before with pasta, that doesn't have to be the case. You can downsize the portion, swap it for whole grain pasta, but really think about protein options and good fats and vegetables you can incorporate into the pasta dish so you get a much bigger plate, but you have much less impact on blood sugar. And that can, vary based on the pasta dish, but it could be everything from just diced tomatoes with tomato sauce and a bit of protein to an abundance of, peppers and onions and almost a pasta salad, like a cold pasta salad this time of year, can be a really great way to make it more blood sugar friendly, but still give you what you love to eat.
That's fantastic, Erin. And those practical suggestions are so helpful. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you if you have any last summary comments for our listeners. First, Liz.
Hi, Neil. So I want to emphasize the importance of progress and not perfection. In addition to Erin, I think that's a motto that we all need to adopt. It's a journey. It's going to require you prioritizing your goals, so dedicating time to your goals, consistency over the long term, and remembering you are going to have moments where you are not doing it the way you intended to. So be patient with yourself. Recognize the small wins along the way, especially those that are non-scale successes, like improvement in how you feel, strength, endurance, and your relationship with food. And don't hesitate to ask for help. Seek a registered dietitian, nutritionist, a certified diabetes care and education specialist, and allow them to put you on the right track.
Great suggestions. Erin, what are your closing thoughts today?
Yeah, pretty much going to echo Liz, but you just want to really focus on that additive mindset rather than that restrictive eating pattern. What can you add versus what can you take away? Don't feel overwhelmed, make those small, simple changes that you can be consistent with. And if you need more, recipe ideas and inspiration, two places I highly suggest checking out are loveonetoday.com, which has amazing, great recipes featuring fresh avocado. And then I also have a lot of recipes, simple, easy tips and tricks on my website, which is erinpalinski.com as well.
Fantastic. Sarah, your thoughts?
I think this was a wonderful discussion, and I'm just even thinking about my own process of how I make a plate and the tips I'm going to take from today. I think, like many people, I often start by thinking about the protein and the carb that I'm going to have, and then I look at my plate and I say, oh no, there's no vegetable, there's no fruit. So thinking of that from the reverse standpoint, as Erin described, of really looking at your plate more holistically first and thinking, well, where are each of these components and how are they all coming together, and adding each thing together into that plate. So thank you.
Fantastic. Elizabeth Hanna, Erin Palinski-Wade, thanks so much for joining us on our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Fresh Avocados, Love One Today, for sponsoring this informative podcast. And of course, thanks to our audience. Tune in next month for a discussion of going back to school with diabetes. For the American Diabetes Association, I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik, and thanks for joining us.